gentlemen, thank you first of all for inviting me. I'm more than happy to share some thoughts on technology development, more specific technology development and the relationship, of course, what the telecoms industry does there. But let me start on a very different note. Over the weekend when I was in a plane, on a long-haul plane, I saw a movie which is an American movie from the famous movie maker Michael Moore. You might have heard about him. He's the kind of movie maker that always makes extremely critical movies about several subjects. This time the movie is a new movie he just made, and it is called Capitalism, a Love Affair. And America, of course, is not in the American economy is not in a very good shape. And there is a lot that you can see there, which of course is not so nice. You see the foreclosures of many people's houses. You see increasing unemployment. And Michael Moore is the master in showing all this suffering on the screen and then drawing a very big picture out of that. And of course the bottom line of his story was more or less that capitalism had totally failed. I never have figured out what his real opinion is. Is he a communist, or is he just a smart movie maker who makes money out of populist themes? It's probably the last thing. But it makes you think as an entrepreneur or as a businessman. It makes you think, you know, is it true that capitalism has failed? Because we saw the banking crisis, you see the crisis in Europe now. Many places in the world, economies are not doing as great as they used to do. I personally think that that is not true. I personally think that capitalism as a system has brought us a lot of goodies, and I also think, and that's why I'm relating it to my short address to you, that probably the mobile industry, the mobile telephony industry is one of the best examples there. Because if you look at, let me quote one number to start with, what we call penetration, which is a bit of a funny word, but what we mean is if you take 100 people, how many out of those 100 people do have a telephone connection? Now, of course, in the past, those were only fixed line telephone connections. Now, if you looked here in India in 2001, in the rural areas, that was 2 out of 100. And today, that is 35 out of 100. I think in no country in the world, a government could ever have done that. Actually, in most countries in the world, I've worked in the telecoms industry the last more than 20 years of my life, and I worked in a lot of areas, different regions in the world, and I can tell you it's everywhere the same. Governments were managing telecoms for 100 years, and they brought the penetration up anything between, in the whole of Africa, 2%, and in the Western countries it was maybe 60% in the best countries. And that took them 100 years. And what you've seen in the mobile industry is that due to the enormous inflow of private capital, that these companies were able to create a revolution, more or less, in society by this technology. If you look at a telecoms company, is that a technology company or is it actually a service company? I think it's both. We have a service from them, that's very clear, but the back end is extremely depending on technology. It's not only the technology that we use to transmit the signal to your telephone or to your BlackBerry or your iPad or whatever you have, but it is also all the technology around that. Because our processes are extremely scale efficient. You cannot imagine that you could have done this without IT technology, without very smart software. Just to give you a feeling, we as Vodafone alone store every day 7 billion call detail records. So 7 billion records of calls every day we have to store. Now, of course, if you would have to write that down in small paper notes like we used to do 20 years ago, that would be quite a task. We get 45 million calls from customers every month. Now, how can you do that if you don't have very sophisticated IT systems that immediately bring up all the information that you need and that can translate also action immediately for the customer, hopefully into a positive action? Just to give you one more number, we have over 100,000 telecom towers in the country. Huge investments. Huge scale, only possible if you are completely supported by really modern technology. The downside of all of this is that it gives a very good outcome, but it means that you need a lot of money to do that. So it's a very capital-intensive industry. We alone, Vodafone, have the last 4 years invested about close to 70 billion rupees every year. So 7,000 crores rupees every year, year on year on year. So it's a huge capital need for these technology companies. If you look at the industry, then it's interesting to see when the PC was invented, which was in the 70s of the last century, that it took about 30 years in India for this technology to reach 22 million users. If you look at the internet, which is here about 16 years, that is after 16 years at about 100 million users today. Mobile, after the same 16 years, is close to 900 million users now. So you see that the mobile technology has been taken up incredibly fast. And why is that? It's very simple. It is simply because people love the technology and they need the technology. If you see the penetration of both wireline and wireless has grown now to 74%. So we're very close to a situation where really everyone has direct access to communication, which in my view really improves people's lives. It is improving people's lives on two fronts. It's the personal front. Many countries in emerging markets, more developing markets, and you see it clearly in India, there's a lot of migrant labor, and these people are typically far away from their families, far away from the places where they have been born, their villages or whatever it is, and having access to communication makes the life much better. Of course, also the business side. I'll show a bit more of that very soon. And I must say, I nearly hate to say that because it's very painful for us, but India has also been able to develop into the lowest cost market for the customer, which means that we have to do a lot for very low revenues. We charge you as a customer about 10% what you would be charged in most other countries in the world. There's only one or two other examples. So you're getting actually a very good deal, I guess. Now what has this industry done? Why is this industry not just nice, but why is it important? And what is the power of technology here? There are several studies, and this is from really, institutions like the World Bank, institutions like the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, which have done extensive research in the effect of mobile telephony. And you can say that every 10% of penetration in a country delivers a 0.8% sustainable higher economic growth. So that's a huge driver of growth. So the moment you increase your communication penetration, you will see that drives the economy. And I think part of the success of India is due to that. Of course, it also can drive specific sectors. If we talk about IT, for example, or we talk about the BPO industry, that would have been completely impossible, the development in India of IT and of the BPO industry, if the communication over the world, now I'm not so specifically talking about the mobile communication, the communication in general, between continents, between cities, between countries, had not developed as it had developed in the last 20, 30 years. Because most of these services, most of these activities are all depending on more or less constant communication with other parts of the world. Then another important thing what the industry does, and also again here this has a huge social effect, on society, is it bridges the gap between rural and urban. And that's a big issue in India. You know that about 50% of the people live in pure rural areas. It's only 18%, contributing 18% about to the GDP, but there's huge needs out there. And it could actually get worse, because there was a McKinsey report about 1 year ago, which predicted, made by on demand of the government, predicts that in the next 20 years in India, 250 million people are going to move from rural areas to cities. So you see a huge urbanization, but it also means that rural gets more or less emptier and left behind. Now what mobile technology clearly has done, also in India, is make that connect again. Then the industry has been an incredibly important generator of employment. We ourselves have about 22,000 people directly working for us, but if you take indirect, which means our suppliers, our outsourced contracts, that easily goes up to 100,000. And there is a study from PwC who actually says that the direct employment of the mobile industry in India is about 2.8 million people, and if you add the indirect employment, it's about 7 million. So a huge contributor in terms of jobs, and many of those jobs are also very high-ranked jobs. Most jobs in my company, the people we employ, are people, of course, who are dealing with technology, with IT, with customer-facing jobs, pretty high-qualified jobs. And then, as a last point, the technology is also, the telecom sector is also very important for the government. We alone, last year, contributed 19,000 crores to the tax man. That's about 7,000 crores, a bit more, 7,500 crores, which is my usual contribution to the tax man. I'm taking it all together. The tax man meaning license fees, spectrum fees, taxes we pay. And last year we had the 3G auction, and we paid another 11,500 crores for some spectrum we got. So you can imagine, we are the number 2 player in the market here, so you can imagine we have about 20% market share. So if you would more or less do all these numbers multiplied by 5, because that should be the situation if I'm 20% and these are my numbers. What a huge inflow of capital it means for the finance minister, and actually, of course, in the end, for the good of society. So, a very important industry. Now, where do we see the role of this industry in the near future? Of course, we have always been debating a bit in the telecoms industry. Do we deliver connectivity, as we call it, or do we deliver more than connectivity? I think, especially in countries like India, in the next 10 years, you will see that the whole ecosystem around telecom companies will deliver a lot more than just technology, and we see it happening. There was already some speaking about education. We have done trials now with Pearson from the UK and developed educational programs for schools where we, via the mobile technology, can deliver education as a distant learning service for schools who don't have access to more sophisticated material. Schools typically work with pretty antiquated material, can be books, can whatever, but the moment you put more modern, sophisticated systems up there, they can make education much more interesting by showing videos, by showing more colored pictures, by being able to work on that in a far more modern and sophisticated way. So that is the kind of development that you will see, especially again very important for the rural areas where there is a lack more or less on everything, but for sure also good teachers. And it is certainly possible to do distance learning and have people in the classroom or even sitting at home and having direct face-to-face contact with teachers. Another important sector is the healthcare sector. In India has a level, if you compare it to the general level in the world, of about 1/4 if you take doctors per inhabitants. So there is a huge need for doctors, and again, especially in the rural areas. Very few people there actually have access to good healthcare, and even less have access to good pharmaceuticals, to good medicine. Now there are lots of examples already in the world, but also in India, that the mobile technology can really help there. People can get small applications on their phone, which might be as simple as reminding someone to take a certain medicine from time to time. But especially in the area of childbirth, where traditionally in many countries there are a lot of casualties amongst women dying while they give birth or after that because the healthcare is bad, and there has been a lot of attention for that in the world. And most of that is done actually by mobile technology, where women are being called to the center. Women are being reminded to do this, to do that. And that is, of course, you can extend that even up to the level where, with modern sensor technology, people can carry their phone, and the sensors in the phone could, for example, detect if something with their health is wrong, if it is a specific sensor developed for that. So I think in the next years we will see a lot of development there. And also for smaller enterprises, this is a huge opportunity, because again, if I say, do we deliver connectivity or a service, we typically do not at least develop services. So we typically are in a cooperating model with smaller companies who deliver the service via our connectivity. But it's clear if it's a complete new development, like in education, healthcare, etc., that we need a cooperation between smaller companies and more established companies that can then spread the distribution of those services very fast. One more example is agriculture. Agriculture is a typical example where mobile technology has changed a lot, because those markets were, especially again in the rural areas, defined by being extremely intransparent. The farmers did not know the prices of the crops, the farmers did not know when to sell, and via very simple mobile applications who are available in the market, of course, already while we speak, they certainly get loads of information, which makes their position against the middleman much, much stronger, which has driven agricultural development. I'm not talking about actually what probably is the biggest use of our technology, which is entertainment. And entertainment is, I think, also important, because everyone wants to have a bit of fun in life, isn't it? And especially in rural areas, there's very little opportunity for entertainment. So what we see is that people use mobile phones for, of course, listening to the radio, but also downloading music. And you will see with the broadband connections that more and more will be available in the country that will very fast move to download of videos, YouTube type of applications. So we think that our technology is not only a big driver of economic development, but could really, in the future, even more than we have done in the past, also facilitate the process of making people's lives better via the healthcare applications, via the education applications. And an important application that I want to mention as the last one is here, what we call mobile money. You will very soon be able to make payments with your, via your mobile phone. The development of that service in India has been slow for several reasons. We think that is really a pity, because we think that especially again, the common man out there, and again, especially in the rural areas, doesn't really get what he or she deserves. Even all the government schemes that are there for food subsidies or special schemes for fishermen, we and I think most of the people know that only part of the money which is meant for the person at the end of the chain is getting there, because a lot of it disappears in the chain in between. We could very easily resolve that issue by making that transfer electronic straight to the receiver. For several reasons that so far has not happened, but I'm sure that once people start to understand what the progress could mean here for normal people, then we will probably also see in the next few years a huge drive there. Thank you.